favorite active looks, including select Nike for the whole family. Now at Macy's. And get contact-free curbside pickup at select locations. Find a location near you at Macy's.com/stores.
Indeed knows that for any business, your next step is the most important one. Like hiring someone who can make a real impact.
And sorry, you got the
Indeed
shares.
can help you find high-impact hires
right?
faster without any long-term contracts. And you pay only for what you need, thanks to our super flexible payment options. So why not take that next step with Indeed? Get started with a free $75 credit for your first job post and get in front of more quality candidates. Go to Indeed.com/high-impact. That's Indeed.com/high-impact. Terms and conditions apply.
In uncertain times, you can be certain of this. The Salvation Army is serving those most in need with help and hope. Thanks to your donations, the Salvation Army is helping those affected by COVID-19, those who've lost wages, who have no home to retreat to, who need food, help with utilities, and most of all, hope. To see how you can continue to make a difference, visit GiveWestwood.org. GiveWestwood.org.
Life, Love, and the Grind is sponsored by Life, Love, and the Grind Limited, and to the extent applicable, their guests. The views and opinions expressed therein do not necessarily reflect those of News Web Radio Company or its management.
Guys, welcome back to another episode of Life, Love, and the Grind. We have some great guests today. As you know, we are always a little hesitant about bringing politicians on because usually they have a very contrived, scripted message. As you know, if you listen, Sean Allen and I'm Raza Siddiqui, again with Sara Sadat, are always kind of arguing about the benefits of bringing on activists who are actually on the ground, on the streets, fighting for a cause. And we're always going back and forth. I'd rather get more activists rather than politicians. For once, we have someone who's both. We're joined today by Alderman Byron Sigcho Lopez from the 25th Ward. And Alderman, there's a lot going on in Chicago and a lot that we want to talk about because, let's just talk about your week. In the past week, you have been at numerous kind of events showing your solidarity with Black Lives Matter, with other organizations, talking about the importance of being able to protest, being able to get the message out there. There's obviously a lot of anxiety coming in with Operation Legend, the President Trump's bringing in the federal troops in Chicago. What's going on? What's your philosophy with what's happening?
Yeah, no, thank you, Raza. And I think very much so appreciate the kind of approach that you have in your show, because it's really at the grassroots level and people on the ground when you really see what's going on, especially now when we find out about these events of federal agents coming to the city, and in a decision that was rushed in the last minute after Mayor Lightfoot herself just a few days before stated very firmly that she was not going to collaborate with Trump or allow federal troops or federal agents, as you said, to come to the city. Now, what I think is important to note, and is really important in this case, is that we gotta understand how we get here, right? And that's important for us because I think the big piece that is missing here is that we are here when obviously with the type of violence that nobody's disregarding, that we have seen on a spike of violence like we've never seen before.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, 15 shot outside of a funeral home with 2 Chicago's police squad cars out there. There's an epidemic of violence. So we need to figure out that happy medium, right? Or how do we go about it?
Absolutely. So here's what is important to know, how we get here, because of course, to Mayor Lightfoot, this rhetoric of that Trump is not doing this or Trump is this. Well, let's analyze how we get here. And I think that's what is important to note, that Mayor Lightfoot is failing in her policies. He's failing as the mayor of the city to make sure that we address the issue of violence. That has been, it has been an issue that's been with us for a long time. But what we're seeing is a situation that is deteriorating very rapidly, and also has been dismissed by the mayor in the past. She has continuously said that that she's doing everything she can, that she's going above and beyond to address the issue. But let's recall, in the last budget meeting, we have already, a number of us have already raised some red flags for Mayor Lightfoot about the issues of violence prevention, the lack of resources for violence prevention programs, the lack of resources for housing and access to health, you name it, mental health. resources.
Well, so I'm seeing that you're saying that there's somewhat of a failure to actually implement some of the policies that'll make the city safer. On July 22nd, President Trump said that the federal law enforcement is coming to restore public safety, protect our children, and bring resident or violent perpetrators to justice. Those sound like good goals. Is that not what you expect to happen? Is that something the mayor should look at, or why are we standing somewhat against that? Wouldn't that be a good idea?
Yeah.
Those sound like ideas that the city should be embracing.
Yeah. Now, one of the key parts here is that we're trusting with a racist administration. We're trusting an administration that has breaking every promise, including most recently, President Trump has even gone as far as to say that he's not going to accept the results of the election. I mean, we're talking about an administration that have consistently failed to fulfill their own promises. Now, Mayor Lightfoot, I understand, feels that she has no other choice. But the reason why we get here is because of the lack of action under her administration. We had a federal relief that received $1.3 billion. We have asked Mayor Lightfoot to allocate money for violence prevention programs. We have asked Mayor Lightfoot to address the issue of housing issues that we have, allocating housing relief for the most vulnerable, access to mental health care. We have asked the mayor repeatedly about the consequences of not addressing this in the most vulnerable communities in the city, South Side, West Side. We see the situation in our communities, and what we are hearing, not new, not now, but consistently from Mayor Lightfoot, is more policing. What we've seen in our city right now, these are data, this is hard data, facts. We have the city with the most police officers per capita. Now, when you have 40% of our budget going towards the CPD without any accountability, now we're still waiting for Mayor Lightfoot to take concrete steps towards police accountability. Now, she mentions the consent decree, and she's mentioned so many excuses of why she's delayed on something that should have been. I mean, well, let's recall what happened with the case of Laquan McDonald. Let's recall that this has become a major issue, not now. It's been an issue in the city of Chicago for a long time. But the lack of action, the Mayor Lightfoot, and the lack of concrete, bold steps so that we are not in this position where her failed policies now make her feel like there's no other choice. There's no other way to do this. But we see the track record that policing hasn't worked. What we see has worked is actually put resources in our communities. When we put resources in our schools, when we invest in social workers, when we invest in housing relief, violence prevention programs, we see the results. Mayor Lightfoot has gone the other way every single time. Every time Mayor Lightfoot, even the latest popular opinion about making sure that we reallocate resources, that we make sure even we have a conversation about bringing or taking out CPD from our public schools, right? I mean, we see major cities, a lot of municipalities going that route, reallocating resources, rethinking how we can make sure that we bring relief and resources and violence prevention programs to the areas that are most in need. Mayor Lightfoot is moving completely in a different direction. And furthermore, now has trust a president that has very little credibility across the country in one of very complicated, complex issue like violence in the city of Chicago. It is her responsibility.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that gave me pause when I heard that federal troops were coming is that we have gone so far in establishing accountability within our police department, proper oversight, making sure the body cameras are on, making sure that they're held accountable. Now you have federal agents, and I don't have a lot to go on, but I've seen what happened in Portland.
Absolutely.
They're coming in fatigue where you don't know what agency they're in.
That's right.
So let alone not identifying themselves, but how are you going to hold them accountable? How are you going to see that body cam footage? How are we going to go from an era where we're not going back to John Burge in Holman Square, eliciting confessions, but knowing that these are law enforcement officers who are actually doing what they can to make sure that people are safe? What's that accountability? Have you as a city been able to have that dialogue with the federal government to be able to figure out what exactly the protocols are going to be?
Yeah, and you hit the nail on this one, because it's exactly the lack of dialogue. I mean, this kind of agreements, if we're going to get into some agreements like that, they have to be super detailed about how is the DEA gonna intervene, how is the city gonna collaborate, what's gonna go with ICE. We have Homeland Security as one part of the list of agents that are going to come in. we have a number of agencies that are going to come in and quote unquote collaborate without much discussion, without anything in writing. For what I can tell, is what we see is a decision post city council meeting. I mean, we had just a city council meeting where the mayor had an opportunity to perhaps discuss that with us, and unfortunately, he didn't hear anything until a phone call with the president, where she basically said, you know what, we're just going to go with this agreement. So again, this kind of lack of details and lack of accountability is not only worrying and concerning me, and I'm sure concerning reporters for what happened in Portland, right, where even the mayor of Portland was a victim of tear gas, right, by the federal agents. So again, when we see what's going on in Portland, while we judge what the track record of this president is, what prompts Mayor Lightfoot to take such a decision without much discussion? But unfortunately, what we've seen is that's her approach. That's the unilateral decision making that she is becoming too used to. And I'm not the only one who's questioning this. We just recently, over the weekend, a list of at least 50 public officials and dozens of community groups, including the Cook County Public Defender's Office, are questioning this decision, precisely because there has not been any conversation. And what we've seen in Portland should be enough for us to caution us. I mean, this is just days ago that we see this happening in Portland. And all of a sudden, Mayor Lightfoot on her own decides to make this decision without any consultation, without conversations, without any details. So of course, we're going to be concerned. And I'm not the only one. And the 50 officials plus dozens of community groups are asking Mayor Lightfoot to stop this kind of collaboration, because we don't even know at what extent, what kind of collaboration they're having, and the risk and the atrocities that we've seen in Portland is not something that we're going to tolerate here in Chicago.
So I'm gonna take this moment to kind of explain. So 9 counties are covered by Life, Love, and the Grind here on WCPT. So there are a lot of people who may not be familiar with the demographics in the area that the 25th Ward covers. Let's tell them it's always been kind of like a safe haven, a place where a port almost, where the immigrant communities have come in. Currently, it's representative of Pilsen. Also Little Italy. I should let you talk. I mean, you know a little bit more about this ward than I do, so please tell us the connection with the immigrants there.
Absolutely.
And how your constituents feel about what's going on.
Absolutely, and I think you're right. The 25th Ward has been the home for a very strong enclave of immigrants. Chinatown is also part of my district. Pilsen, Little Italy, McKinley Park, West Loop, South Loop. And we also have a strong enclave of the Black community too, the Abla Homes, Barbara Jean Wright Courts. So we do have a very diverse and very strong community in the sense of people want to see policies that address the issue of violence, right? I think that what I hear from my constituents is, well, we've seen the lack of accountability in the police department. We see the violence affecting our youth and our most vulnerable. And on top of that, we've seen also what the federal government has done to the immigrant community. The federal government has, right now, as we speak, children in cages, have separated families, in disproportionate rates like we never seen before.
So there sounds like a lac of fundamental trust between the two groups.
Absolutely. So at the very least, what you expect is like an administration that harass the immigrant community on a daily basis, and then all of a sudden you hear here in the city of Chicago, where we're supposed to be a sanctuary city, where we should have this conversation, with a serious conversation about what's going on and the impact on Black youth, and the impact of immigrant communities. We'll all of a sudden see a decision made all of a sudden without much consultation. Of course, we have residents who are concerned, and of course, in the sense of the intentions of the Trump administration with all this. I'm not sure if Mayor Lightfoot sees it that way, but I'm telling you, in our community, there's a lot of fear and concern, not only in the immigration side, but also what's happening in terms of, Black youth who are now already feeling, the tension with police, and then we're going to put even more, agents, so we are not only here in the immigrant community, but also with a lot of our the residents across the district who are concerned about what is going to be the collaboration, and without details. That's why we are sending this letter from the 50 public officials who want this to end, because we don't have any kind of clarity or any details of this.
And labor organizations joined on to this as well. So it's not just a civil rights sort of mechanism, but also I heard labor organizations, elected officials all kind of chimed in. One thing I do want to talk about is when this mayor was elected, it was obviously historical. There was a lot of excitement about seeing the city's, a new representation for the city. Do you feel like your constituents have been let down? There was a lot of excitement about it. or do they feel that she'll step up and do the right thing? What are you hearing? What's dialogue like in your community?
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly concerned just because of the actions. I think that the discourse and the platitudes are one thing, but the actions speak for themselves. I think that, of course, in a city like Chicago, where we have seen the atrocities that happened in the past under previous administrations, the school closings, mental health clinics are being closed, the lack of access to affordable housing. We've seen the spike in homeless residents all over the city. We saw a really tough situation and now this was an opportunity for real change. Including myself, perhaps opportunity to reset the button and rethink how we're going to approach these tough issues, including the issue of violence. What we have seen, however, is the same old policies of the past. We have seen a police department operating without accountability. We see lack of resources of violence prevention programs, lack of investment in the South Side, West Side, Black and brown communities struggling in the middle of a pandemic without relief. And that's a concern that, for what the rhetoric, we see another neoliberal administration implementing. And I think a lot of the thing that we see in the inside, it really suggests a lot of the same players making the same decisions. So I think my constituents, including myself, are concerned. Are we moving in a different direction, or is this just more of the past?
And I've got to ask you, like, being a kind of a political outsider coming in as an activist, it must be frustrating to have to deal with an establishment. And I'm going to ask you how you deal with that, but I could ask you questions all day, Paul. It looks like we have a caller. Could you tell us who the caller is? Let's get a chance to get the community to ask some questions. Again, you can reach out to us, ask the Alderman questions at 773-763-9278. Paul, who we got?
This is Jim from South Elgin.
Jim, you are on Life, Love, and the Grind. You're talking with Alderman Byron Sigcho Lopez.
I support the center in city politics, yes.
So I'm just going to repeat this question real quick for our streaming audience as well. And basically, you were questioning, or you were a proponent of the fact that sanctuary cities actually introduces more criminal elements, perhaps, into our community. And I want to give the alderman a chance to respond to that.
Yeah, and I'm gonna be very clear on this question, because there's no evidence that suggests such a thing in terms of the sanctuary city being an issue in the city of Chicago in terms of this spike on crime and violent crime in particular. I think that we have plenty of examples of, in fact, 30+% of our small businesses come, in fact, from the immigrant community. And we do have an immigrant community who has been the backbone of Chicago for centuries. So I do think that we have to be careful in this notion that somehow this is a Trumpian approach, that the immigrant community is causing crimes, that this is the immigrant community, if anything, is the problem that we have to address. Now, let's go back to the real issue, because I think that there's some things that he's mentioned about economic activity. And I think, again, small businesses are, of course, part of the backbone. And small businesses also have a big chunk of immigrant-owned businesses, that we have Blanc-owned businesses that are today struggling. And I think that there's, if we're going to take on the evidence base, what he does mention is the lack of support for the small businesses, especially the small businesses right now. So and also the lack of employment opportunities for Black and brown communities. I do think that is a fundamental problem. It's because what we see right now, developers, right, mega developers that are getting even TIF money, subsidies from the government, and that money is created, is used to create luxury housing, right, to make more profit. This is a fundamental problem on the fiscal approach to our issue. So we are giving away public dollars for luxury development, for profit development, of often developers not even from the city of Chicago, extracting wealth from our city. On top of that, and there's a lot of issues with the issue of local hiring, or local youth, or residents
Well,
are not
these
able.
developments kind of strike me as almost like the Walmart they're pushing out the local mom and pop shops. They're pushing out the local community, the identity of that community, and trying to create something different, trying to create something more universal. And where does that leave your residents? Where does that leave the people who make this city great, the ethnic diversity, the stories of inclusion that we should be fostering?
Absolutely, because that is a fundamental way of how we can address the violence, we can address the inequality and poverty in the city of Chicago. So he does have indeed a good question. I think that the diagnosis of the problem is off, right? But it's right in terms of these developers extracting, and it's not only developers, corporations like Walmart and Target that get tax breaks, that get incentives, they got even TIF money. But let's look at what they do for the city of Chicago. We have developers who got Lincoln Yards on the 78. 78 is in my district. They just took $2.4 billion in TIF money. Let's see how much are they giving back. Let's see how many people from the community they're hiring, right? So we're losing on the chunk of money that we put in, but also the opportunity to create jobs, to create investment for the people of the city of Chicago. And I'm not the only one. Even some colleagues who don't agree with me have said that a lot of the jobs are going to Indiana, are going to Michigan, are going to out of state. So we're losing not only in our public investment, but even the revenue we're generating. That is not a small revenue. Talk about $20 billion in the next few years that could be generated by these mega developments. Where are they going? Again, to corporations, developers, and the well-connected that don't invest in the city of Chicago. Now, we can make a different choice, but let's not blame the immigrants for this. These are decisions that are done by developers, corporations who fund the mayor's campaign as well. So that's what this problem is about. Now, when we talk about the small businesses and what we need to make sure that we help them, indeed, let's create employment and opportunity. A lot of small businesses and restaurants are being now closed or cannot operate, right? Who are the big benefactors of all this? The corporations like Walmart or Target, which Mayor Lightfoot actually went in favor even further, almost trying to change a law to make sure that the lobbies from Walmart is not able to do business again. Well, so we can go on and on about what we can do.
We could go on and on about this all day, but I will tell you, Life, Love, and the Grind does support small businesses. And to that effect, these are the small businesses which support us.
Perfect time.
Hi, I'm attorney Lou Cairo, owner and managing partner of the GWC Injury Law Firm. Over the course of just a few short weeks, COVID-19 has changed our entire world. During this difficult and uncertain time, it is now more important than ever to stay connected and try to help those in need. At GWC, we have the technology and processes in place to do just that. We are still signing up cases remotely and taking depositions and settling cases in order to obtain full, fair, and complete compensation for our clients. We want you to know that our team is working 24/7 to fight for your rights, just like we've been doing for over 40 years. We also want to take this opportunity to give a huge shout out to all of our first responders and healthcare workers who selflessly risk their health every day in order to save the lives of complete strangers. You men and women are the true heroes. From our family to yours, thank you, and please be safe. GWC. For your free remote access consultation, call me 24/7 at 312-999-9999.
Megan Financial is an independent retirement and financial services firm dedicated to the working men and women of organized labor. Megan provides straightforward, custom-fit financial advice and specializes in defined benefit and defined contribution pension plans, as well as participant and retiree health and welfare benefits. Megan Financial has the knowledge and experience to navigate the union member through all phases of life. Call 708-444-1090.
Securities and advisory services offered through Cetera Advisors LLC, member FINRA, SIPC, a broker-dealer and registered investment advisor. Cetera is under separate ownership from any other named entity. Office location at 5321 South 94th Avenue, Orland Park, Illinois, 60462.
Welcome back to Life, Love, and the Grind. I'm your host, Raza Siddiqui. Sean Allen sitting this one out. Sara Sadat behind the console, helping out with the producing. We're here with Alderman Byron Lopez from the 25th Ward, and we want to get into, because there's a lot going on. We talked a little about basically the federal agents and some of the concerns that are coming in the community, but we also want to talk about some of the other activities going on in the city. You've been on the streets a lot this week. You were in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. I was actually at another press conference, what was it, on Friday, that Jamal Green was putting on, talking about the statue of Christopher Columbus coming down. I really do want to get your take on that, because I did hear something very interesting that I wanted to talk about. He was having a press conference, and there were a lot of people driving, yelling ignorant comments, but one person of Italian descent came down and said something that kind of made somewhat sense to me. He's like, you can't build a narrative of one ethnic group by tearing down the cultural significance of another. And I was like, well, you know what? When I have the alderman on, I want to ask him about that.
Yeah.
Alderman, what do you say?
Yeah, that's well, and indeed, this is important that we separate the issues, right? The issues of the statues, and in particular the Columbus statues, right? I think it's very clear. We look at the facts, right? That the statue does represent colonization and genocide, and a lot of the people in the community, of course, are challenging the history, because we are talking about changing that history and making sure that we have a structural change. Now, I do think that and I do represent the Little Italy community as well, at least a part of it. And I had, a good conversation. And in fact, many of the constituents that I have reached out to have a dialogue about this. And indeed, I think that there's an understanding that we need to make sure that we don't make this about an issue of ethnic change or ethnic disputes per se, right?
We don't want to pit one community against the other, but what it seems to me is that's the perception that sometimes comes out, that you're doing this, and it's funny because I'll sometimes hear people say you're taking down Italian descent, and I'm like, well, I think he actually did this in terms of Spanish colonization, but at the same time, this is part of history. You can't dispute the fact that this is something that should be discussed. And sometimes I believe, this is something I believe, when you tear down some of these statues, you lose an opportunity to discuss.
Absolutely.
Right?
And that's the thing, that's what we cannot lose now. And unfortunately, first let me thank the young people, especially those activists. That's what I commend the group of Black Lives Matter, the young people who have been out there courageously to make sure that there's a clear discussion around this. I have certainly heard from our constituents. I'm heard from also the communities that I represent. And I think what I hear very clear is that the dispute is around the history that we need to change and overcome that structural racism that is we're now, right now, as we speak, facing and need to challenge. Now, when I talk to, and I think that we have heard from many people in the Little Italy community who understand, okay, and of course, there's more dialogue that needs to happen so that more people can understand that. I was just recently with a constituency, so well, this represents, some of my childhood memories. This represents some of the things that, where I grew up, right? And I said, well, yes, let's talk about this issue. And I used to be a teacher, so I like to discuss this in detail and say, well, but listen, what if I tell you that this is what represents for other people, right? And I said, well, I understand that, but what can we do? And then we are in the conversation that what can we do? So I think that we need to acknowledge that and hear that. Unfortunately, that's the thing. My issue sometimes with administration is that we're not hearing, we're not dialing, we're not having this conversation, and we're pitching people against each other. So when we talk and we had the conversation, say, you know what? Yes, I think maybe we should place these statues in a museum so that we can this can be about education and learning about the facts. I didn't know about that. And now we're going to have a conversation with one of the Little Italy, community groups in the next month so that we can talk about how can we honor your heritage in a way that represents our values as a city, all of our values, but not dismissing each other.
So many times, I think part of the problem is we're all waiting for our turn to speak, and we're never really taking that opportunity to listen to what the other side says. Part of the problem. Some of the other problem is sometimes we don't have that opportunity to dialogue with people who have different views. So this is why I'm so grateful that you've been able to come and kind of talk to us about and I do want to talk about other things, and I do want to introduce our other guest who we have, Andrew Holmes here. If you watch local news, you'll recognize him as somebody who kind of comes in and talks about the epidemic of Chicago gun violence. And Andrew, here's what's interesting. Yourself, the alderman, you're both activists, but also publicly elected officials. And it kind of, within my union, I have always been an activist. I've always been out on the outside of the establishment, someone who's wanted changes. And then I see when I get into that position, it can sometimes be frustrating because you've got goals, you've got missions, but you've got to work within this establishment. Alderman, I'm going to ask you about that. But Andrew, I want to ask you about that as well. When you see that there's a problem that needs to be addressed, namely Chicago gun violence, of which you've been an activist for, how do you go about projecting that message? How do you go about getting the trust of the community and making sure you can deliver and bring home a message that this has got to end?
Well, first and foremost, it's hard because you have to have the family working together too. And I always said this, charge it to my head, not my heart. Fathers, go back. I don't care if you have a little boy or a little girl and you separate. Go back and be their voice because your voice is just as strong as mine. Mothers, the same thing. If you separated from your teenage kids, go back. Go back. Save that soul because you can be the one to keep them from picking up that gun. They need love. They need attention. And a lot of the attention and love look like they're getting it from the street. They love their gun more than they love that home. And that has to stop. Because, see, they don't understand when that mother's inside that medical examiner's office to identify her loved one and the shock that is on the face of that individual that's laying there is deep. They don't want to be in those shoes because that person's laying there without a heartbeat. And you discharge that weapon and your heart is still beating. It's tough. But at the same time, we have to keep doing what we're doing to try to enhance the quality of life, to try to get these guns off the streets, keep these guns out of the hands of not only criminals, and they can stop saying these are teenagers that are committing the crimes or committing the violence. We got teens that have $1 billion worth of knowledge. We got a lot of adults out here that are doing the shooting and influencing instead of trying to save these souls, because we got a lot of smart teenagers.
Andrew, I'm going to ask you this. You work with police, you work with the community, you try to get people to step up and realize that this is an epidemic that needs to stop. Too many of our children have been stolen. We were talking about the ethnic diversity, Alderman, in your community. It doesn't matter if you're Italian. It doesn't matter what race you are, what neighborhood you grew up in. These are human lives. These are people who have families, who have people who love them. But you got to go out there and you've got to project a message of we've got to come together. But I see you out there every day. I see you out there weekly repeating the same message. What does it take home? What does it take to drive home this point? What does it take? Let's talk about a few days ago, maybe a week ago, when 15 people were shot outside of a funeral home, going there to tribute someone who was fallen before, and then 15 people are shot. And then you come out there and you deliver the same message that we've all heard you deliver many times before. How do you change the hearts and minds of people? How do you get that dialogue? How do you get people to come together instead of taking the easy way and letting a gun solve their problems?
Well, first, when you come out, you got to come out with a real stiff message for them. You got to pull them to the side, look them in the eye, and talk to them. Just like so many of them. Say, hey, here's an EMT course that can change the rest of your life, and you can save somebody. Take this EMT course, graduate, go into the private ambulance service when you graduate, take the advanced course for the Chicago Fire Department and move on from there. Here's an opportunity for you. Then there's an inspector course that they can take. I try to give them some options right here. Here's a job field. Go into this job field. Streets ain't got no job.
Opportunities, recidivism, fighting recidivism. Always hard for me to say that word, but combating that and finding a better solution. Alderman, we were talking about what doesn't work. What does work? How can the two of you collaborate? How have the two of you collaborated? How do we get a better future given where we're coming from? How do we work together?
Absolutely, and I think what Andrew mentions is what we see that in us, in our community, in every community. I think that family separation is a terrible thing, and I think that I agree. I think that's a thing that we need to understand and really comprehend the trauma, right, of gun violence, the trauma that creates within our communities, within our families, right? And I think when we start getting at that, we need to get to the root of the cause of this, right? I think the issue of policing is a reaction to the problem. So continuing to react into the problem, and that's what I take an issue with, is not going to get us to a better place. So the prevention aspect of things and making sure that we prevent like families to be separated, and preventing families to live in poverty is a thing at the core of this. If we can create employment opportunities for our community, that's what I'm extremely disappointed that the city of Chicago continues to allow developers to operate as they please and corporations. And because then we don't get a fair share. We don't get access to these jobs that are critical to be sustainable. How do we support our small businesses? Not too long ago, I was talking to a small business owner in a community, in my community, and was saying how inspectors were coming and in the middle of a pandemic trying to make this so difficult for small businesses and almost threatening to fine $5,000 fines, when they're trying to collaborate and say, well, how can we continue existing, right? I mean, I don't see that level of aggressiveness when they talk about Walmart or Target on these big corporations are well connected, right? So how do we protect our small businesses who hire locally, who are helping our community in a way?
Who can't afford the lobbyists, who can't come in there and even afford the time to come and speak about the issues they have because they're trying to run a business.
Absolutely. So I think what my point here is that I don't want to miss is like at the core of this is addressing the core issues, is making sure that resources are there. It's not true that we know. I mean, we have money to subsidize big developers and corporations, but we don't have money to help these small businesses. We need more Black-owned businesses. We need more businesses in our communities so that we can start getting our communities, through full employment, sustainable, good employment, not the kind of employment that the city of Chicago provides. People who have to go now to work 2-3 jobs, working for these parking deal corporations who pay very little money, and on top of that, they are a disastrous deal for our city. So these kind of jobs are predatory jobs that we're creating for our community. What we want is good paying, sustainable jobs that exist in the trades, in the businesses, in our small businesses. We can create them, but I think that the ground is tilted here, and I think that corporations, developers have way too much access, way too many advantages with respect to the average person in the city, the small businesses, the people in the city who need that help. And the resources are there. We just need to make sure that they get to the place where it's needed the most. The lack of action and the lack of response to that is what it creates. I mean, our schools are starving of music programs, arts programs, things that keep our kids engaged, right? So they have defunding our schools, close them, and now we are defunding also, or making it even harder for small businesses or people who are actually helping their communities to continue to exist. In that kind of economy, I tell you, the result is very clear, and we're not going to police our way out of this. We're going only to solve this when we get to the core of the problem. And when I don't see an administration committed to that, I take an issue with that, because, like we're discussing here, there are families on the line. There's safety of our communities in the line, and we're going to fight until we have real structural change that I know is possible, because we see what is happening now and what is the possibility. And I think that we can do a much better job.
Andrew, I'm going to ask you about that. So he was talking about the alderman was talking about the predatorial nature of some of these businesses versus like maybe the symbiotic nature of having a local business that brings in these opportunities, that provides these opportunities to these people that you're trying to save. How do you help foster that? How do you help people realize that maybe this is the way you go? Tell me about your daily routine in a city that has an epidemic of gun violence. We're dealing with 2 epidemics. We hear it all the time. What's your solution to get out there and combat the one that we hopefully have some control over?
Well, we got to get these big businesses involved. I mean, instead of just coming in, breaking in the money and going out, help the small business. Business help business. That's just about it. Then when business help business, what we need to do is when they hire a teenager or hire someone and that's your employee, you should take on a responsibility. If that employee wants to go to school or wants to go to a trade school, invest in paying for his trade or her trade school if they so desire want to go. And as long as they go, invest in his education.
And that's how you build up a community.
Invest in the education of big business establishment. You have an employee there full time. And if that young man or that young lady wants to go to a trade school, you should invest in them going to the trade school and follow them through the finish. And as long as they are going and working for you, then you have advanced the quality of their life. A big change.
Andrew, I'm going to ask you about this. I know you work hand in hand with police a lot and help bridge that gap. The alderman and I were talking a little earlier about the federal troops coming into Chicago, federal agents. There's concern about lack of oversight. Tell me, How do you view that as a community activist who's out there, who's talking to people? How do you view that? How do the community, the people you talk to, view that?
Well, you're going to have some that like them. You're going to have some that don't like them. You're going to have some that try them. But I'm one to believe in the community if they come together. We got three things going in this community. Carbon monoxide, you cannot see it. It can kill you, you can die from that. COVID-19, you can't see it neither. It's a silent killer. The biggest silent killer we have is some of the people that are in the community that know who the shooter is and won't say anything. We can solve all of these crimes ourselves. We can solve police, your own community, block by block.
And on that, let's go to our next commercials. Thank you, Andrew, for weighing in on that.
Life, Love, and the Grind is proudly sponsored by Rich Lewandowski and our friends at Breaker Press, Chicagoland's top choice for union printing. We're a third-generation family-owned business that has been helping unions and political campaigns win since 1976. We've been involved in hundreds of winning elections, and we get our printed materials to you on time and on budget every time. Whether you're running for the courthouse or the White House, we will take you from concept to design and from print to mail or your supporters' front yards. Breaker Press can help you reach the voters you need. Call Rich at 773-852-5733 or email rich@breakerpress.com. For all of your political printing needs, visit us at breakerpress.com.
Democratic Socialist.
You're back on Life, Love, and the Grind. I'm Raza Siddiqui, Sean Allen sitting this one out, Sara Sadat behind the producing desk. We're here with two great guests. We have Alderman Byron Lopez, and we have community activist Andrew Holmes. There's a couple things I want to talk about that we haven't had a chance to get on, and that's kind of how you come from the world of activism and get into the world of, let's try to make a difference. As an activist, you can almost see immediate results, right? You go out there, you're hitting the ground running, you're talking to people. It's really a grassroots campaign. Then you get into this establishment where it's about this historical context of how it's always worked. There's an institutionalized way to do things. And it might not be that easy to effectuate change as it is when you are on a grassroots level. Is it frustrating? I'll start with you, Alderman.
Of course, it's frustrating because, as I said, and I'm sure Andrew can relate to this, when you are, and I was an organizer and teacher. So you're direct communication, I still am, if we do our job as public servants, right? We should be connected to the needs and issues and concerns of our constituents. When I was an organizer, we have the same issue. I think when, we have a failed administration now, of course, when, investigated my predecessor, who is now part of the investigation of indictment Alderman under a case that has Perkin trial. We saw what's happening, right, and the lack of action and lack of support and the consequences in our community. So of course it's frustrating when you see the lack of action, and now when you come and say
lack of representation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because there are lives on the line. When I was a volunteer soccer coach. I saw some of my former students getting killed. Victims of violence. We have seen, the effects on families that we know. We just, recently had another shooting of a terrible shooting, and it was a little outside my ward, but affected one of my constituents, right? A 17-year-old, 16-year-old teenager again. So when we see this kind of level of violence, what we want is results. We want to make sure that this doesn't happen again, that we want to prevent this from happening. And when we don't see this...
So you have something personally at stake in your heart that you want to get out there, and you get a message, hey guys, listen to me. I'm sure sometimes it's like just shouting to yourself in an echo chamber. Or do you find allies there? Do you find people willing to listen, work together towards these ends?
Well, there's obviously, I think there are allies in terms of the city council, right? And I think, of course, there's a lot more outside city council right now. And I do think that's what brings me, I think, hope, but also determination to see that the city of Chicago, I think that our constituents are getting more involved, more informed. And I think at that extent, I think ourselves as public officials have to be more responsive and like many other officials who may not have that approach of the grassroots, perhaps they need to start adjusting to making sure that they're directly responding to the needs on the ground, which right now they don't see. I think a lot of the concerns and frustration on the ground and by community groups and people in Chicago is the lack of response, the lack of action, the lack of results on the city council, like police accountability being one of them. Is being repeated time after time. We have a bill, the civilian oversight of the police bill, the CPAC ordinance that we have been trying to introduce, and we still have a difficult time. I mean, we've seen the many cases of police brutality. Rekia Boyd, we see Laquan McDonald, George Floyd. When does it end? And I think the issue here is when we have 40% of our budget, right, that goes towards the police department in this case, we should also be expecting checks and balances. There's no favor that we're getting into that. We demand checks and balances. So again, at the extent that people in city council and the mayor understand that, I do think that we will be able to make better choices. I think at the extent that we listen to what's happening on the ground, we avoid people suffering. We prevent violence. The lack of, and again, going back to the statutes, creates, more suffering, more violence, because, when the administration is tone deaf or what's happening on the ground, or they're misunderstanding, or quite frankly, disconnected, or don't have the experience to address this. We have bad decisions to affect all of us. Every single city, every single block of our city gets affected by this. So again, our job is to make sure that we make good choices in terms of policy. We pass good ordinances to get to the core of the problem. When we don't do that, we continue to see a city that has failed the vast majority of Chicagoans at the expense of them to benefit the super rich, the billionaires, and the well-connected.
I was at a rally where I heard one speaker refer to you as my friend, the alderman, and she said, I never thought I'd be calling an alderman my friend because they're not so approachable. I almost wonder how you can be an alderman and not be approachable to your community. So, Andrew, I'm going to ask you this. You're on the streets, you're on the ground, you're meeting with the community, you've really got your pulse on it. How easy is it to access the lawmakers, the elected officials, the people who can actually maybe effectuate some of this change? Do you find that they're responsive? Do you find that it's a challenge to get in touch with them? What's it like from your perspective as a community activist?
Well, some is a challenge, but the only heartbreak that I have about that is when they do give out these grants, to organizations. You're giving them out to the same old organization. There's some, I've looked like mom and pop stores that are not getting the advantage. You have some people that stay on the blocks that have some organization that knows the streets, knows the schools. They need that same opportunity too to get those grants for their 501c and organization. And I believe they can work their neighborhood, they can work their communities, and they have so many ideas that are being missed. And some of our legislators need to sit down with them and listen to them, because see, they have a lot of knowledge that can help and that can break this cycle. I'm not the only voice out there. We got a lot of men and women out there who voices are stronger than mine. And if they just take the chance to listen to them, listen to their opportunities, listen to what they provide, and help them, give them the same opportunities that you've been giving the grants and everything to other organizations for the last 10 years.
Alderman, you came from out of the box, right? You were an outsider. You found your voice, a way to represent your community and come in. How do you give a voice to these organizations that Andrew's talking about to step up and really be able to realize their potential for themselves and the community that they are directly involved in and touch every day? How do these opportunities get created?
I think fundamentally it has to be with your own connections to the community, right? Making sure that we have a relationship, that we understand what's going on, who is out there, like Andrew mentioned, who is out there helping the community, who are the small businesses who need support, who are the organizations that are doing violence prevention programs. We do have it, for instance, in my ward that are working, we work with social workers in the schools who know some of the young kids. We want to do this work. Unfortunately, the problem, as I said, is that who gets the support and who doesn't. So when we politicize these issues, when this becomes about who do you know and what, rather than what we need to do to address these issues, I think that we're replicating some of the issues of the past. This kind of pay-to-play politics that had little to do with helping people, but more with helping my friends and those who I want to favor. right? So again, that's what I think the different approach, and I think that some of my colleagues, and I got to say, there are people in the council who have had taken a different approach to government, when we are accessible, when we actually are in our offices working every day, listening, taking calls. I taking calls, and those are the hardest calls that I take, when I had to take a call of a mother who lost a child to gun violence. And I had to take, not to be a performative action to say, okay, well, let me see what I can go say to the press. No, let's look at the core of the problem. Let's see how this should have never happened. And it's the biggest tragedy to get some of these calls. And I've taken too many of those already in my first year. So for us, yes, it is important, because it's the people that we know. These are our neighbors, the people that work with us, that we see in our community. And again, when we start connecting the dots, what we see is that the humanization of our communities, in a way, when we see developers come on taking over and then buying property left and right, and small businesses struggling, don't get the relief, but those who are connected, not only they get retro carpet treatment, they get public subsidies as well. So this kind of corruption hasn't stopped. And I think that what we need to do is to make sure that we bring real relief, especially during a pandemic, relief for those small businesses, relief for these organizations who are doing the work. So for us is being out there with the people, being out there, because those are the people that we're serving. This role of public servants, unfortunately, has not been executed the way that it should be. And it's a fundamental. Local politics are very important. Local politics, where a lot of things happen. And I think our community needs to be more involved. If we want to make sure that we bring those resources to prevent violence and get more informed, I think when people start participating and seeing the structural issues that we have, it's very obvious that we are not getting the resources that we need, but being blamed for it. Being blamed for all these communities, so and so. This community was, and like the mayor said, those were undesirable communities. As I mentioned, like in Pilsen, like 10 years ago. No, those are communities that are beautiful communities. Our communities are beautiful. We have 77 beautiful communities in the city of Chicago.
Every community has its own intrinsic value, has its own story.
Absolutely.
And instead of casting it one way, let's find out what that story is and find the beauty within.
Absolutely. And invest in it. Let's invest in that beauty. Every neighborhood has a beautiful story, beautiful stories. How do we invest in them to thrive and to make sure that they thrive? Not only the downtown area, but we have 77. I tell you, the number of people who come to see communities in our ward, the see the diversity. We have one of the most beautiful cities because we're one of the most diverse cities in the world, but yet one of the most segregated. And it's not by choice, it's by policy. Because people want to be connected. I tell you, we just recently had a forum, a community forum, and we brought all the neighborhoods together. And the beauty and joy that people saw, just finding out the different challenges that we face, and we can start finding common ground. We need to more about connecting our communities, investing in them, not criminalizing them and disinvesting in them, which seems to be the past, and I hope that's not the future. And if that's the case, we're going to fight that, because we cannot afford it. We're in a point that we're a pivotal moment in the city of Chicago, and there are public officials out there determined to make sure that we do justice for our constituents.
A pivotal moment in the city of Chicago. Andrew, real quickly, you have something to say? We got a minute left.
The alderman make a good point about need to come on out and get involved. Need to change their lifestyles and come on out. I piggyback to the homeless. Come on out there and sleep where I slept at with them on the ground with them rats and bugs at night while you sleeping in a soft bed. Then see how it feel. That's what I've been pushing. That's what I've been telling them for the longest. Come on out here and sleep on this concrete, sleep on the ground with these rats and these rodents, and then tell me what's the difference and why you don't want to come out and help and get them off the ground.
Walk a mile in your brother's shoe and you can maybe see where he's coming from. I could not have said it better myself, and I thank both of my guests for coming on Life, Love, and the Grind. We have Andrew Holmes, we had Alderman Byron Lopez. Of course, this is not going to ever be solved with one conversation. I hope to have you guys both on again and weigh in as some of this proceeds, but thank you both for being my guests today on Life, Love, and the Grind. Thank you much.